Thank you so much, Charlie. Such a gift to have you be a part of the Queer, Trans, and Gender Variant Ancestors Project. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be able to be a part of this. Such a gift. I would love for you to introduce yourself, to share who you are for folks that may be getting to know you. Would love for them to hear a little bit about you.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Amáyá Scott. English pronouns they, them, she, hers. I am currently I grew up and was born and raised in the central part of the Navajo Nation in this small town called Chinle, Arizona, which is next to a national monument, Canyon de Chelly, which actually I have told folks is like I basically grew up in a canyon in my backyard. And so what I mean by that is like there'll be times when, summers I would go hiking and moments in the morning where like I'll go on a run through like the canyon, through my homelands, flea markets on Fridays, that type of
Yes.
thing. So it's very much like I think a very lively place compared to many other places on the Navajo Nation. And I am currently going to be a third year PhD student at the University of Denver, which currently contributes to the colonization of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute homelands. And so, yeah, that's sort of like where I'm at in my life. That's who I am. I'm the oldest of two, and my mother is sort of like she's the second youngest out of seven. So I have I would apparently, according to native standards, a medium-sized family compared to larger
Right.
family.
Wonderful, Charlie. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I would love to hear, you share, in a sense, like what the word ancestors means for you, knowing that it can be definitely a complex topic to talk about. Would love to hear, yeah, what the word means for you and what your connection may be to that, to ancestors and to the word ancestors, if you want to just share.
Yeah, so this is not necessarily a definition, but like when I envision my ancestors or the ancestors, as I just casually refer to them, are sort of like people who have survived so much in their own lifetimes and are sort of willing to guide the next generation of folks, particularly
Mm,
within my community. So like when I think of like my ancestors who are Dana, when I think of my ancestors who are queer, when I think of my ancestors who are trans, um, or my ancestors who, there's a wide array of them. They all had different lifetimes and they all have different knowledges. And in addition to that, they're attached to the land. They're attached to my community in a lot of ways. So, like, although I may not have met many of them, my relatives, I have stories and snippets of them that I've learned, whether it's
mm,
from my mother who talks about her grandmother, who then talks about her own grandmother, and then finding out these sort of family histories that I have. And the same with like my father's side of family. And then figuring out like, oh, like and being very intimately close to folks who have become ancestors in my lifetime. So my own grandfather, and then thinking about my cousins, and then thinking about like some of the siblings that unfortunately were not able to come into this world and it just was not ready. And so I think about these folks who had lifetimes, who didn't have a lifetime, but in so many ways are guiding and protecting me, who are offering me insight, who are sort of encouraging me to be the best that I am. But also, it's sort of become a sort of relational aspect because I'm just be like, there'll be days when I was just like, oh, I'll just casually talk to him like I talk to my grandfather, or like how I talk to my sister, like, or how I talk to my friends. Like, there's this sort of reciprocal relationship that I have with the ancestors that has like yes a touch of reverence to them, but it's not entirely forcing them or putting them on a pedestal. When I'm frustrated, I'll get mad at them. I'll be like, why did this happen? What did I do wrong? Like, what can we do to be better?
right.
Or when there's such joy that I'm feeling, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you for being here with me and experiencing this. So that's I usually would describe my own ancestral work as I sort of like is this constant in between, knowing that they're there, but knowing that they aren't there, but still being able to be with them in many ways.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I can really just feel that love, that connection that you're talking about as you're sharing, and really am appreciating the expansiveness of your care and love, and also the realness of that relationship, knowing that, yeah, it comes from people that you know, and also people that you've never met, and that, as you said, you've heard stories, you feel their connection in the land. Would love to hear about that because I find that really interesting. For me, it's been a journey of getting to a place to really expand the word ancestor in my life because I wasn't raised growing up to connect with my ancestors. It wasn't really a part of my family's background. I grew up in a traditional, I would say, like an immigrant family, and my family, we grew up in a Christian church. So we didn't really talk very much about ancestors. So for me, it's been a journey to get to a place to really connect with ancestors that are part of my own family's lineage in Mexico, and also to ancestors that are queer and trans. I've had to either forge a connection or imagine them in my reality. And so that's been a journey. And so I'd love to hear about that for you, if that's been a journey or if it's something that you've resonated with growing up as well.
I would have to say it's been a mixture of both, particularly with my family. So there's this blend of like traditional teachings from my community, and there's also been the influence of the church as well in my life. I mean, oftentimes people are surprised when I tell them like, "Oh yeah, I'm actually baptized as part of the Mormon Church," or as they apparently have been told, they now openly identify as the Latter-day Saints.
Right.
And so being baptized with that church and understanding different aspects of Christianity through that lens. And so there has been this sort of blend in my life, this sort of mixture of like, yes, Christianity and its influence, but also traditional teachings. And so it's sort of like this, like, not necessarily a divide, but this sort of like coming to know this blending, this sort of mixture, as I keep emphasizing, that yeah, there are some teachings that like I may have gathered from the church, but like I don't go to Sunday service. And my sort of prayers are an everyday, all the time occurrence and not necessarily reserved for Sunday.
Right.
Getting back to sort of right relations with land and right relations within myself. So, what is it that I can sort of not necessarily take, but what can I sort of like have some respect for with LDS teaching, especially since my grandmother is a devout LDS member, and then also recognizing that, like, I probably had some ancestors who were at that level too, because like for them, the church was a sort of source of strength.
Right.
Um, Whereas like I'm starting to learn that like the teachings of my community is also being a source of strength. So how do I sort of come back to my community? And I'm very fortunate to have relatives who have already done that work or who have come into my life and who are sharing those stories and sharing those sort of explanations of different medicines, different teachings, different ceremonies. And I think for me, it's sort of like it's really getting back to those right relations with people as I learn more about like my family and our legacy and what we have inherited. Learning the stories of like my own clan origins, learning different teachings of different words, learning the stories of creation from my community and being critical about them. And so it's sort of like the work of ancestors is like, for me, has been the sort of uncovering and the sort of reclaiming a fragile existence denied to me and so many others. And so getting to know them, getting to be in the right relationship has been a journey in and of itself. I think it's something that's very unique for folks.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like the three words that I'm really sitting with connection to ancestors is that reclaiming that you just shared, and that guidance and the strength. I feel that so profoundly in my relationship with ancestors. I know there are many people that, grow up feeling Outsiders or like outcasts because of who they are. And I know for myself, like there was a long time in my life that I felt very alone and unseen, especially because I couldn't see other queer, trans, or gender variant folks in my life, and was just like always wanting to see myself and having such a hard time, and feeling really isolated. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really am almost like proselytizing ancestral connection, because I really witnessed how much they've helped me feel that guidance. They've helped me really feel strength and like I belong to a community. And they've also helped me reclaim practices that are connected to my own indigenous lineage of Bidarita community in Mexico, that really has helped to heal a lot of the wounds that colonization has brought upon my family, and are still healing. You know, it's a process of healing, definitely. And so I really am so grateful for you talking about these things. I really feel that in my own relationship, my own connection, and I'm just so grateful to hear another person who's also really received those as well from their relationship.
Yes, and these relationships has been so wonderful. Like I just there was a story that I learned recently that just made me like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. And then sort of like pushing and pulling at the story and its characters and really getting to sort of lessons. I think a big part for many indigenous communities is the importance of oral stories
Right.
and how these oral stories and these oral traditions pass on so much knowledge and so much lessons that you have to really listen to them. If not, then you are not prepared and you sort of like haven't developed that relationship just about yet. And so sitting down and just learning to like listen has been, I think, a big process of this entire thing. Because
Mhm.
like if I'm not listening, that means I'm either ignoring or I'm talking over them. And then the lessons get lost and then I make a mistake. and someone gets hurt and oftentimes it's me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And do you have any practices that you do with listening? I know for myself, I could just share a little bit. My ancestors connect a lot with rocks, and also with sacred plant medicines, and also with different elements of the earth, like the clouds and the water and the different animals who bring messages. And so I definitely developed a practice of, you can kind of see it as divination or an oracular communion, where you're really sitting with something and, as you said, listening, being open, and also sharing, right? Just really that communion. So would love to hear if there's any practices or any ways that someone especially listening or watching this video wanting to start their own practice of listening or connecting.
I think something this isn't like this is just something I've come to just do is like just going on walks within my homelands. If I feel like for example, if I wake up and I get this sudden desire, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go on a walk today. And I just do that. And I just feel like this internal sense of inner peace when I go on this walk because like it's the sun is rising, it's 5:45 a.m. The birds are like are whispering and talking amongst each other and you just see like the clouds gently moving and the sunrise and I'm just like, oh, okay. And like it's like all of the problems I was having so much difficulty with just like left my body for a moment and I'm able to think and process. So there's that. There's that sort of thing of just like moving and not necessarily moving, but like feeling inspired and just doing it.
Right.
Because there'll be like thoughts in my head. I'm like, oh, I want to like if I want to go for a run, if I want to go on a walk, if I want to go on a swim, I'm just like, let me go do it. And then I'll be like, where should I go? And then I suddenly just get this inkling. I'm like, okay, I'll go there. Um, and that's has been something. So and I don't know exactly how one achieves that, but I think it's just like the first thought that pops in your head and just go along with it and see what happens. And then another thing is so oftentimes I burn different medicines when I'm sort of in a state of distress. If I'm feeling stressed about finals, or if I'm feeling uncomfortable with a conversation I had with a friend, or there's like this looming problem, I'm just like, ugh, and everything just seems just so annoying, I just like burn some medicine and just like, listen, I need some guidance, some assistance. Like there's this sort of not necessarily demand, but it's sort of like, let me ask for help and see what happens.
Mm.
And then the smoke usually helps calm me down and I'm able to like listen. That's also the other thing. Like I'm able to just like, okay, focus, ignore everything else for just a moment and just like listen. What is my body feeling? Where is this pain in my body and what can I do to sort of move to lessen it? Or what is sort of like where should I be moving to? If that makes I hope that makes somewhat sense. So listening is not just using your ears, it's also just like feeling the tingles and the sort of blood flow through your body and just like really taking a pause in your life because there's so many distractions. I mean, I just realized there's so many distractions for me. And so like having these moments of like intense, not necessarily solitary, but like just having these moments of like peace, like feeling the breeze on your face, letting it feel like feeling it through your hair. All these things to just sort of like just pause, think, or not even think, but just listen. Listen to like the world around you, but also the world that's going on inside of you.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I really have also benefited so much from these types of containers. You know, I kind of see them as containers or vessels where, walking is definitely a deep resource for me where, yeah, there is something that's so special about kind of moving from that. I think there are other things, as you said, kind of brought up the word distraction. And I think that sometimes, like the way media and the way that different things are set up in our lives, it can really take us to a place where we really start to have almost either like we're kind of obsessing over some sort of thing outside of us, or we start to obsess within thoughts that are within us. And I feel like having these containers or these moments of resource where you go out on a walk or you take a moment to really burn some medicine and to make some petitions or to be in communion with ancestors, these are moments where you are moving out from that place of distraction or from that place of being within and having just kind of feeling isolated in your own thoughts to then moving out into the outer world and or moving into the spirit world, right? And saying, I'm here, I'm open, I'm shifting this consciousness or shifting this perspective I've been having. And so it's definitely, I know, for me, it can be hard sometimes in the moment to remember that, but these are deep resources that are available to us whenever we need them. And so thank you so much for sharing that because I really do want to encourage folks if you are having a moment where you're having distress or just really, not feeling your best to, yeah, as you said, go out, go for a walk, listen to where your body is wanting to go, or, move in a direction that feels good for you. If in whatever way your body is able to move, that can really be a way of creating another form of connection. And also, as I've heard you share, really connecting with the land too, and feeling the energy of the land and the animals and the different elements that can really also provide such a deeper resource too.
And I think something to add to that is also like learning the history of the land is also I think critically important because like I know the history of my homeland. I mean, Candy Shay is a source or is a site of many historical moments of massacre and genocide. And so really understanding that that is an intimate part of like the layout of like where I'm at compared to also like the same being for when I'm living in Aurora, Colorado, understanding that Denver, Colorado was also a site of massacre and genocide for the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute within the area. And then also being a place of a relocated city. So natives basically having to decide to leave their homelands and work in the city so that they can have some sort of financial stability in this ever-changing world. And I sort of like learned to do that type of like historical inquiry
Right.
in my undergrad experience. So from 2013 to 2019, I lived in the homelands of the Narragansett and the Wampanoag. And something I learned there is that like if I want to be in right relations with myself is to really know the history of the area and build those relationships with people there who also know that history. Otherwise, I'm contributing to a mess of colonization that in ways by reinforcing these narratives of romanticization or the sort of deflection of accountability.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely. And do you have, let's say if there's someone who's wanting to learn more about the land, are there any resources that you would recommend for folks to start that journey of kind of getting into right relationship or learning more about the land where they're at?
Yeah, so usually I just if usually I tell folks that like if you want to like really get to like how to be a support for indigenous peoples is to really just like figure out like whose soil land that you are on, but also realizing that and even as that self that has limitations. So like native-land.ca is a wonderful resource, an entry resource really
Right. Right.
to understand like, oh, so these are the people who are here, and then clicking on these names and then finding out they have like hopefully a tribal website or like their own website, clicking on it and then learning their own, seeing like what's available there. Now that you have a name, you can then be able to Google that name to figure out more about them. And if you Google their name alongside a city, maybe even find some historical stuff. I mean, I learned this sort of historical inquiry moment, especially when I also during undergrad. So I was doing a summer project looking at photographs of my ancestors, of my people. And although they didn't have any names, I learned the names of the photographers. And the photographers, I learned like why were they in my homelands?
Right.
And I found out it was mostly because they were not necessarily, they were sort of like documenting these different areas, they were map making. And so there is a sort of like different acts of colonization happening through photographs. And but I also got to learn the stories of like the people, not necessarily the people themselves, but like why would like the history of like how these were taken, where they were taken. And then from there going on in my own little rabbit hole of like learning more about them.
Yeah, and I think you bring up something that's really important is that as we do this really invaluable work, really much needed work of getting to know where we are, where, the land that we're on, it can definitely bring up a lot of emotions. And especially because I do feel like a big part of the colonial project has been to obfuscate, to diminish, to hide a lot of this information, right? And to make it inaccessible. I know for myself, like I grew up in a primarily Spanish speaking immigrant community, and I knew that my family was indigenous, that we came from a place that had indigenous culture, and my parents never wanted to talk about it. They always wanted to minimize it. And I feel like this happens in many different ways with different knowledges and also different historical acts, right? That are violent or sometimes also beautiful too and resilient. And I think that's a big part of the ancestral work is also getting to know our ancestors, getting to know these stories that are connected to the land that we're on, because they're definitely still very present, and I think even I am currently living on in the Ohlone territory, unceded Ohlone territory in Berkeley, and a big part of a project I worked on last semester was learning about the land where I'm at right now. And even though it's, I would say, a beautiful kind of nature reserve area where I live, there's a really big like forest. There's definitely a big history here of colonization, of industrialization, and of oppression and exploitation of different communities of color. And I think that's also, it's really framed where I live in a different way. And it's been really helpful to learn this history because, I think most of the people that live in this neighborhood where I live don't even know that. And I think it's still that energy is still there. The animals feel it, the plants feel it, the land is still healing from it, and so it definitely shifts the way that you are able to commune with what's around you. I would love to hear if you're open to sharing. One thing that's been really profound for me is receiving ancestral guidance around projects, around, research interests, or around even directions of my life, like ways that I'm meant to travel or people I'm meant to connect with. Has that been a part of your own ancestral journey? Right? Like receiving any messages around, that guidance that you've talked about or that strength that you've talked about in terms of like the many different practices that you do? Because I know you're someone who's very multi-dimensional in the ways that you create and do your work.
Yes, particularly I think like with my own educational journey, it has been of like it's so strange because I just realized this the other day. I was like, it seems that I'm more led to things, to opportunities that just seem to just like come out of nowhere, if that makes any sense. Like for example, when I was applying for grad school the first time, I was like, I don't really know what I want to do. And then my mentor just sent me this email about like a summer opportunity. And I was like, oh, I'll just apply for that and see what happens. I get in. And then they tell me, like, oh, like what you're interested in is actually what we don't offer, but we're thinking that you might be a good fit for this line of study. And I was like, okay, I'll learn more about it. I'll apply for it. And then, like, as I apply for these different schools getting accepted, it's my only word was about financial aid. And then all of a sudden, there was this one school that was like, hey, we just decided to, like, oh, we're going to offer you a 2-year scholarship so you can finish this
Wow.
grad
Oh
program.
my gosh.
And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll take that because, like, it makes sense, right? It makes financial sense. And then the same thing happened with like PhD programs. And I was like, I did, this is like my second time applying because I did apply the first time, but like I didn't get into any of the ones I liked. And if the ones I did get in, I was like, oh, doesn't make sense at all to do this. And so the second time, it was more so I was applying to all these schools, but my heart just wasn't into it. And then I meet my now advisor at a conference. And this was just like a casual conversation I was mentioning. I was like, oh, like, I'm thinking of like going to PhD program. This is what I'm interested in. And then the friends I made were like, oh, you should talk to so and so. And I was like, okay. So I talked to so and so. And the deadline for their program was in a week. I was like, okay, maybe it's not feasible. But then I get it, I do it, and it's like the one program that like accepts me. And it's with the person and my advisor was someone who I talked to for briefly. And they offered me limited funding, but then I started getting these scholarships for that make up the difference. And I was like, okay, so I guess I'll go to this. Um, and then I was worried about housing. And then my advisor was like, oh, I have someone for you that I think that you can like rent a house with. And it's so affordable. So it's been this sort of like thing where it's like I've just been led to these different things that just, they are explainable, but they're a little too coincidental, in my opinion. And I decided to just like call them divine intervention.
Yes.
Um, that's what I've been calling it because there's also been moments. So, like for example, so there was this one person that I dated for several weeks, and it was so interesting to see like how compatible we were on so many things. And then and then there were just like there was like these moments throughout the relationship that I was like, oh wow, like this is because like we've known each other since February, but we didn't start dating until May. And it was just like this weird moment of like, oh, like I remember casually talking to like just like in my moments of frustration, so I'm like, ancestors, why don't you just send me someone who I can have fun with?
Oh.
And this person asked me out, and I was like, oh, and then we just spent that whole day together. And it was like the most fun thing I've ever had. The most fun day, the fun date as well. And then it was just like wonderful 6 weeks of just like fun,
Oh.
a summer romance.
Yeah.
As I call it, summer loving that happened so fast.
Yeah.
But like it's just like and so like there's just like these moments I'm just like, oh, I want this, and then it happens, or I'm just like, I'm not too sure about this, and then something comes up. And I appreciate it, But then I'm just like, but there's certain things that I want, and then they just take it away. But they come up with a different opportunity. I'm just like, okay, I guess I'll go this way. And that's where I sort of like get mad at them sometimes. Cause I'm just like, I wanted to go this route, but you're making me go the other way.
Yeah, and I thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate that you have that kind of connection with them where you can, share your frustrations. You could be like, "What's going on? Like, why'd you send me someone for such a short time?" Like, and yeah, this is also like really bringing up how ancestors can work through other people. They can work through experiences. They can work through moments of divine intervention. I've definitely kind of seen that little path weaving itself in my own life as well. Those moments where you're just like, for me, I receive many times those messages from my ancestors where they tell me, like, go talk to that person now. Like, and when I receive the message, I do it. Like, even if I'm scared, even if I don't know what we're going to talk about, I just move because I know that my ancestors are opening up that passage, that line that's going to weave itself and make those divine moments happen where, yeah, you can kind of see miracles happening in your life when you're letting them open that road. But then also there are those times where you get frustrated and you're like, why are you taking me down this path? I don't understand. And I definitely have built a relationship where I try to ask them for more information or have them speak with me in a different way, or even, say like, why would you do that to me? Like, yeah. So I'd love to hear about that because I definitely know that not everyone speaks with their ancestors in that way. But yeah, just would love to hear about that part of it for you.
It the way I've done it, just like it's a casual conversation with them. It's like a relationship. I think of them as like my friends. I
Right.
think of them as like my relatives. Like I'm gonna talk to them like I talk to my friends and relatives. Um, and they see things that I don't, obviously. So they're also very protective. And they're also willing to listen too as well, because they'll be like, listen, I don't want to go through that again, so let's avoid it. And we avoid it.
Right.
And then but then they'll be like, I'll say some like I think this is more funny. Like I'll make fun of like my sister or my cousins, and then like several moments later, I suddenly somehow trip over my own feet. And so I'll just be like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Humble me now, won't you? Um I don't know if the word fun is the best way to describe it, but it's a very like in some reciprocal type of thing. It's like you're in a relationship with yourself and with something older than you, but also something young at the same time.
Right.
And so there's these and messages come up all different ways, whether it's like a hummingbird literally at my door asking for food, or it's like me tripping up in my own foot after saying something quite mean.
Definitely. And I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier, those moments of listening, right? When that message comes through, and that it can come through in many different ways, right? Through another person, through a hummingbird, through a moment of tripping. There are ways that the ancestors want to share their messages with us there. And I feel like that's also something, if you're watching this video and you're like, I don't really talk to my ancestors, I don't feel connected to them, there could be ways that they are showing up in your life where they're really trying to get you to see them, to connect with them. And it doesn't have to always be like they're sharing a direct message. It could be coming through an experience or a feeling, an emotion that's coming in also.
It could also be like you getting home safely. Like there have been moments where I'm thinking about how I'm just like people like I'm just thinking of like my undergrad and how I would just walk back to my dorm and room across campus, and then there'll be no one along the way, and I'm like, it's like midnight. There's usually people out. It's like a Friday, but like the path home is just cleared up.
Right.
There's no one there. Or they'll be like there's no one on the road, or there'll be like a string of like green traffic lights. Like it's just like there's so much safety and like so much protection around you as
Mm.
well. So that's also how it's coming for me. It's just a sort of like it's not necessarily me listening, but these moments of like I'm glad I just got back here safely. Like that was interesting.
Mm. That's so important to share, Charlie. Really appreciate you sharing that because it is, especially, in the time in this country where there is such a rise in like anti-trans legislation and so many ways that queer, trans, and gender variant people could feel unsafe, is that our ancestors are here also to provide us safety, and we can ask them for safety, and we can also really appreciate and have gratitude for those moments where they're protecting us and caring for us. And I know, this really just hits me just because I just think about like my younger self, like not really feeling like I had that protection and feeling really vulnerable, especially knowing that, who knows what it would mean for me to come out and to, maybe
Mhm.
have to lose family members or friends. And so to know that there are also these beings out there who want the best for us, who want to look out for us, that is so healing, especially because I know I did not grow up with that message, especially as a queer person, especially as a gender variant person. I did not have that message growing up that I had that love and care and protection around me. So I just want to really just affirm that and just say thank you so much for bringing that because I think that's so important.
Yes, it is also the work of that because like, yeah, I have ancestors who may not like who I am now, but that's not their fault. I think about the ways that colonization has morphed and modified their entire being and how it's come up to where they create hate or they contribute to violence against queer and trans folks or any other marginalized community in itself.
Right.
And I'm just like, they're not the ones I talk to. They're not in my life. And this, it's not rejecting them, but it's more just like even having boundaries with them and being like, listen, like you've gone through stuff, I'm going through stuff. You may not be proud and happy for what I am, but like you made your choices. Let me make mine just a little. And then there are those who just like have this profound love for me and all my and all of like the trans and queer community, and they also want to make sure that like things turn for the better, and that's where I draw my strength
Mm,
and
right.
guidance from.
Yeah.
Those are the
And
ones I listen to because like you don't have to listen to all your ancestors.
thank you for saying that. Yes, those boundaries are really important. And yeah, because we do have a mix of ancestors, right? We definitely have those who want to be in connection with us, and those, as you said, that maybe are confused by us, or as I love the way you shared that the way that colonization has shaped them and their being has really made them kind of get filled with that fear or that hatred, right? And so knowing that we have a choice, that we are able to really commune with those ancestors that do hold us in their heart and want to protect us, and that we also get to say no and have boundaries and protect ourselves from those who maybe don't wish that for us, that we don't have to be open and connect to all the ancestors because we know that there are some out there that, yeah, definitely have been wounded themselves and are still kind of really spewing out that wounding as well. And so, yeah, I think that's also important to share with the folks watching this. I'm just like really just sitting with the beauty and the grace of our ancestors, and also of just spending this time to really share this with our communities, because I really am grateful for our communities to be able to listen and to hear from your precious words, Charlie, because I just am so grateful for you just sharing so openly about how your ancestors have connected with you and are just with you and present. And I can even just feel them here in this conversation. And I'm just so grateful for you being a part of this project. And I'm hopeful that people who, watch this can also feel that sense of guidance, that sense of magic, that divine intervention, that they can also have that in their life as well. Is there any last words or anything that you'd love to share? I'd love for people who maybe would like to get to know you a little bit better. If you can kind of share how they can find you, I'll definitely make sure that I link information about you in the description of this video as well.
Yeah, I think something that I would like to say last is that you are also your ancestors. You are their stories, their dreams, their legacy. And in a lot of ways, you're also their responsibility. And then there's also the sort of nature that you yourself are also an ancestor to someone too. You are guiding someone in the future.
Right.
You are shaping their life and their journey in ways that I don't think we fully are able to comprehend at the moment. But you yourself are part of a web and a network of community and divine interventions just waiting or have already happened.
Yes.
um, and for folks who would like to hear me have fun, rant about colonization, talk about various issues in education, you are more than welcome to follow me on TikTok or Instagram, and that is at Dana Aesthetics. Or you could just hear me rant or read my rants on Twitter at Grandma Said No. I also have a blog, danaesthetics.com, where I turn a lot of these reflections into accessible writings, sharing stories and poetry as well. So I'm very accessible digitally.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Charlie. You are such a generous being, and your gifts are so expansive. And I'm so, again, grateful for you being a part of this project. And I'm just so thankful to be also connected to you as a person and to also be an ancestor with you as well. I really, really love that you just shared that we are also ancestors. That is such a gift to share that with our communities as well.